What's up guys, SkyKevin here, and today I wanted to talk about the Season 4 LO Classic server. As many of you know, I've been romping around on that one for a while now, and I wanted to more succinctly do a video on what I like and dislike about what they've done on the server, as well as a list of changes they've made and my thoughts on them since the inception of the private server itself. So, let's get started. LO Classic is run by a couple of avid modders who through some process have been able to unpack the server files and make direct modifications to the code for the old LO Season 4. To those of you that want to try it out, all you have to do is go into your Steam, right-click the game, properties, betas, and select Classic-Classic S4, which will download the old version of the game. Once you're in, you'll see your old Season 4 official server as well as all the other private Classic servers. I'm not sure if you can do this as a console player on the Xbox, so I think you might be stuck playing Season 5. I want to begin by saying the reception I've had from the LOC developers with this has so far been very good. They've done a great job of making all the information for the changes they've done available, and they answer their questions in Discord all the time. You can see a link for that in the description down below. So to go over the differences with this, I think it's best we just get into all the differences from Season 4 Official to Season 4 Classic. I want to make it very clear up front, I still enjoy Season 5 of LO. I still enjoy the changes that the Donkey Crew developers have made with it, but I also enjoy what these developers have done with Season 4 to make it their own. So what's different? Well, firstly for LO Classic, they have embraced a monthly wipe for each of their seasons. This is planned and they have specific tech releases that take place as the season goes on. You start with small walkers, then unlock the meteors, then event tiles for tablets, then hard maps, spire, and lava maps. And finally, the worm map to finish things off. These are all planned on set days and happen roughly once per week as time goes on. They also have a few of their own custom event maps they've done, like a King of the Hill map for instance, where there's loot you can gather at the very center after a certain amount of time. These maps have had a lot of small modifications, mostly to the reward structure associated with them. For instance, the Canyon event map is what they use to unlock the Fabricator to make tablets, and they've adjusted it so that loot spawns in baskets throughout the center. These come online for only a few hours each day and are kind of designed to be like hotspots for PvP opportunities. Interestingly, Season 5 did have a lot of this with quality tiles and the city map tiles as well, but I think Classic has done a good job of balancing the incentive for players to go to these maps and risk their walkers. The gathering rate on the server is set to 2.5 times, and they've done a few things to balance how you gather specific resources. For instance, when harvesting meteors that come down on the map, you start by getting fragments to make the walker mechanisms, then after a set time frame, you'll also be able to loot iron ore from them. There's also some additional loot tables added to a lot of the gatherables, and overall I've found Classic to have a more varied and rewarding loot structure to everything. Even things like points of interest that spawn usually have a purposeful spot to loot some valuable items. And lastly, for the walker systems, they've done a lot of rebalancing with how walker armors work, how fire arrows and other items can damage the walker, and removed mobile stone bases while simultaneously making the static ones unrateable. I think they made some excellent moves in being able to have your static stone base while also giving people the option to build combat mobs to fight each other with. So far my experience on the server has been that players don't often zero your walker, possibly due to the sheer amount of resources to do so. Indeed, with fire arrows costing around 1,000 flots per arrow, the only way to do so would be with ammunition, and at least as far as I have seen, nobody's willing to do it. However, I believe as time goes on and clans get the necessary farming walkers to get mass amounts of resources, I do worry that they will just zero your walker with ballista bolts because they're so easy to make. In fact, not only do you have the 2.5 times harvesting boost, but they adjusted ammunition to craft twice as much, effectively making it 6 times as much ammunition compared to regular Season 4. So with that overview in place, let's go over the specific changes in greater detail. Luckily, they've created a changelog that is accessible on their Discord server, so feel free to go through it yourself, as this will only be up to date as of making this video. At the top of the list is weapons and armor rebalancing. I haven't looked into the numbers too much to quite understand exactly how these weapons and armor are going to deal damage with each other and at what rate, but I believe as a general rule, they rebalance them to be more like a rock, paper, scissors style of power, depending on the defender's armor. I completely agree with this change when it comes to the different weapon types in LO, and it would be interesting to plug those attack values into a damage calculator to see how exactly they all fare against the different types. For player characters, they increased stamina consumption for jumping to take 4 times times as much, which is pretty fine in my books. I think before you used to regain more stamina while jumping in the air than when it took to make the jump in the first place. And they increased inventory slots from 16 to 20, which is also just a great quality of life decision. And they increased the stamina available for running from 70% to 100%. On the original LO, if your stamina goes under 30%, your character starts to slow down. And I always find this quite annoying, since you essentially then only used 70% of your stamina pool in most situations. Next, we have two cool changes to buffs, the first being Worm Tinctures, now increasing damage by 20% for 1 day or until your character dies. I think it's a cool thing for two reasons, that A, it'll stop you from killing your character to move around in most situations, and B, it gets rid of the overpowered Worm Tinctures from the old Season 4 where players would stack hundreds of points into damage and one-shot people wearing the best armor in the game. At least this way, it's well controlled, but a still valuable boon in a fight. The other change they made, which I think is really awesome, is they made red bananas increase your HP by a flat 30 until death. I feel like this is one of those changes that was pretty easy for them to do, yet we always wondered why the LO devs didn't do something with an otherwise completely useless item. For walkers, as I mentioned before, they changed the weight of stone, clay, and cement bases to be 1,000 times heavier, so now you can't really move them once they're built. I think this was necessary, as having a roaming stone or clay base that was unraidable just didn't really make much sense, especially if you're going to battle someone for a proxy walker. Often people could just make a stone fob that they unload right in front of the enemy proxy and shoot at it from where they were sitting, well protected. They added maintenance chest storage as well, which is just another quality of life decision that I agree with. They also changed the Belang Walker so it can't pack stone, clay, and cement bases, and they completely removed the Siler Walker altogether. I think that's a good idea since, well, Silers really were just these monstrous walkers that were nearly impossible to kill and could trek around wherever they would please. They changed up the Proxy Walker to have reinforced armor rather than typical walker armor. They also lowered its HP from 100,000 to 30,000 and increased the no build zone 10 times higher and 4 times wider, so there's no more walling it in from enemies. And they also reduced the kill penalty so that they garner more income from players farming on that tile. I think these are all great changes, especially since the no build zone and damage type ones are really helping to incentivize PvP. Making proxies more of a contested resource really helps to generate those potential fights from clans vying for control of a tile, so I'm all for it. The Mollusk Walker now has their doors open at 80% HP, which this is probably the first change I actually disagree with. I think that given the availability of resources, the Mollusk Walker would not be hard for a clan to batter down to 80% rather quickly, and it's classically known as the solo-friendly walker. Perhaps that's just because I've been playing solo mostly myself, but really the Mollusk doesn't have much anything else to excel at if that's the case. I've never actually seen one on the classic servers so far, and I doubt anyone will when so many of the other walkers are just better to use overall. They increased the speed of the Stiletto Walker, so now it's as fast as a dinghy on flatland and faster than a dinghy on hills, as well as the ability for it to destroy small trees and cactuses that it runs over. I think this was a great idea, seeing as the dinghy was originally too fast for what it was. Along with these other changes, I think making the walkers have unique things that they're good at really helps, especially if you're considering the tier of the walker being built and how effective it will be. This is also true for the Falco Walker, which now has slightly more speed and the ability to destroy small foliage, but not medium and large trees. I think it's a good balance because it makes the Falco to be mostly a desert roaming type walker. The Hornet and the Buffalo had some interesting changes as well. They were reduced in size by 10% and put into the same category as the Falco when it comes to walking over trees. I haven't had much experience with it myself, but I think particularly for the Hornet Walker, that one was a bit too large for what it was, and should hopefully now seem a little bit more realistic to use in a fight. The Schmetterling, Domus, and Panda Walkers were added to destroy all foliage except large redwood trees when it runs things over. The Domus now opens at 80%, similar to the Mollusk, and Schmetterling's height was reduced by 30%. I think that's a really cool change as well. The Domus opening at 80% actually does make sense, given it's such a large walker that it could be used by an entire clan. I'm actually really interested to see what the height change for the Schmetterling actually looks like in game. The Titan Walker has the ability now to trample over any and all trees and foliage in its way, and they also slightly improved the movement speed. I feel like they could definitely do more to make this walker the best of the best. Considering how many tablets and how much effort it takes to unlock, it should be the strongest walker in the game. So far, I haven't really seen that being the case, even with these changes. The Cobra Walker has now been fixed to no longer shoot at the ground. I don't know how accurate that is. And lastly, the Hercule Walker has greatly increased torque storage. For walker add-ons, they set the driver's cage to 6000 HP and made them unopenable even at 50% HP. For gun pods, they increased reload speed and decreased the rotation speed by half. And for the ammo chest, that's limited to 2 per walker, they changed the size to allow for carrying more ammo. The battle fan has been disabled on the Raptor Walker, thank goodness, and they increased the storage from 100 to 1000 torque for the fan itself. They also made it consume 100 torque for every time you use it. Lastly, for general walker balance, they set all the wing types except the base wings to have hard armor values, so it's more difficult to grief, along with heavy legs having hard armor, as well as 2 times the HP. They also changed the weight penalty for all walkers to no longer matter until the amount turns yellow, and they also increased the collision of steering levers to hopefully stop a lot of the meshing that could previously be done. I think these are great integral changes that add a lot of playability when it comes to the walker fights. It gives more onus to having a long drawn-out walker battle, rather than just taking out the legs quickly and wiping everything on the deck. I haven't seen exactly how the meta for this has changed, but my only worry is that if ramming Falcos end up making a return, as those were very counterintuitive to the idea of walker versus walker fights. In terms of ammo, as previously mentioned, they rebalanced scattershot, ballista, gun pods, and repeaters. Scattershot is the best for clearing soft things like structures on the deck, as well as wings, and bolts and darts for all the other stuff. They did some neat things like changed the bolt speed and weight for darts to be more useful, and they also changed the bolt speed of ballista as well to be based on the type of the bolt. So now a flint bolt fires at half the speed of what an iron bolt does. They also reduced the crafting cost of bolts, and they increased the number of rocks that come from a scatter shot, as well as a drop-off for the distance that they travel. I think these are some great changes, as ammunition should never really be a large chore for stocking your walker, and indeed in the old Season 4, you would spend most of your time farming bolts for a ship rather than the weapons to use the ammo itself. At least this way, ammo is still a factor, but less of a priority than the walker or structures itself. As I mentioned before, they also changed fire arrows, so now they can't be craftable from Rupu Gel, and instead you buy them from wandering merchants for 1000 flots each. They now deal 2000 damage instead of 850 over a 10-minute burn time, and a single bone spike sword hit is all that's necessary to remove them. To me, this is a pretty good change given how fire arrows operated before, and now that they're valuable, the damage output reflects that. Catapult boulders had a nice change too, where they increased the damage with the distance traveled. So now if you shoot further with a boulder, it can do 1.5 times as much damage. I feel like that's a great way to give siege some utility, especially making it a devastating weapon without making it something you spam all over your walker and throw directly at people point blank. It works more like it should as a piece of artillery for a fight. Chalk bombs now deal 5 damage every 2 seconds, insect bombs are added back in, healing bombs nullify gas bomb damage, and they changed trap chests to finally have the same HP as normal small chests, and the name of it is actually a small chest. These are some great changes as well that should have been made a long time ago in Season 4. Just logically, it makes trap chests actually something that can be utilized, along with the other bomb equipment actually having countermeasures to fight against it. Moving on to the maps, we have lava maps that now lava only deals damage to walker legs instead of the hull. They removed the eclipse from the canyon map, they changed meteors to drop iron ore after the first week, and they increased the number of spawn points from 79 to 15,000, meaning it's pretty much completely random where the meteor will spawn, and when it does, you'll have everyone running around looking for the most valuable resource that comes from it. It's a great way to have some spur-of-the-moment organic PvP on a small scale, so I'm all for it. They also changed the worm to damage only soft and hard materials, so now it can't kill walker hulls anymore. And they changed its own armor to hard, so it now requires bolts to kill. I think it's a really great addition to add that to the worm map, making it an actual difficult enemy where you require a walker capable of gunning it down. Indeed, the past process to kill the worm was just to jump on its back and melee it to death, which wasn't really conducive to the whole walker versus monster battle. I think this is a fantastic change that they've made. For the pyramid point of interest and the ancient city, they did a few things to change the amount of loot that can be gained from these maps, along with changing the ancient city to ancient canyon to reduce the lag. They added a lot of small tablet fabricators there as well, and decreased the windmills that spawn, adding 60 different loot bags to the center that drop ceramic, tablets, and other modules. And they increased the loot respawn time to 3 hours, as well as adding green rupu to the large camps. It's another really cool change where they just overall increased the reward incentive of the map, map. They made these event maps a place for clans to rush in and battle it out for control of the tile. As a solo, it'll be difficult to really get anything done in these maps, so you might just end up wingsuiting around, which I don't necessarily think is ideal, but at least in this case, you've got some incentive to visit the map to get more resources. But the larger clans will probably overlook those things for their own bigger goals. With different crafting stations, they did a lot of quality of life changes, as well as increasing the number of slots and stack size to a lot of them. For instance, the stomping station now has 4 input slots instead of 1. They lowered the height of it so it doesn't stick out the roof of a 1x1 building, and they changed the purification stations to hold 1,000 water with 10 slots, and it no longer loses water over time. They increased the fiberworking and campfire stack size to 200. They increased the stack size for the advanced woodworking station. They fixed the height of the furnace as well, and changed the fuel stack size from 100 to 1000. They changed beds to have 15 respawns instead of only 10. And lastly, they changed up some of the cosmetic base pieces like the arena segments to have much less HP and no longer be spammable. Another great little addition that I thought was cool. They changed the cauldron and lamps to have an input of 1000 instead of 100, meaning you can store a whole lot more fuel there if necessary. The other final few changes they made were to things like red bananas, which I already mentioned, and that they can be acquired from windmills, pyramids, or green rupu. They fixed flares to be impossible to grapple, and they made Rupu Shaman drop more bone spike swords. They added a nomad killer Rupu that uses iron gear but drops small amounts of clay on medium maps. They increased the HP of the rangefinder, they reduced the loot amount from strongboxes, and they changed simple pickaxes to now have tier 2 harvesting. These are kind of random, but I really like the added Rupu types as well as the change to the simple pickaxe. I think overall, as you can tell with these changes, there's a lot here that I like. In fact, I think most if not all of it, but probably the reason for this is that these were changes that were logical fixes that should have been made a long time ago. I can't speak to how difficult it was for the LOC team to make these sorts of changes, but I can't imagine it was all that hard, and yet it makes the game so much better in terms of functionality. Take the trapped small chests, for instance. Season 4 added this, and it was the dumbest thing because it always said trapped chest on it as the name. With a simple name switch, they suddenly make it once again a viable strategy to use. And I can't help but wonder how long it really took the LOC devs to make a change like this. And this is echoed throughout all these changes that they've made so far. There isn't anything overreachingly different from the original Season 4, except changing the values of things and rebalancing what was necessary to contribute to the gameplay. So far, I'll say that LOC has the potential to create those sustainability loops, and although I'm not 100% certain that it will, I think these devs are going in the right direction to improve the experience for their players. I still have my concerns, of course. For instance, I don't really know what large clans are using for their meta for zeroing walkers, but I can't imagine it's difficult for them to get the ammo together to zero everything they come across, which will inevitably happen to me as a solo player. In fact, there's really not much as a solo you can do to fight against large numbers of people at the moment, which I say this understandably that this game is catered and specifically supposed to be a team game. I think that team aspect, though, has a lot of danger attached to it in being the downfall of the game itself. It might reach a point where your players really only ever log on whenever they have the numbers to go out and have a fight available to them. I could see a lot of people deciding not to bring their walker out on a tile and just wingsuiting wherever they go, just because they don't have the numbers. Personally, I hated this type of gameplay in Season 4, so hopefully they can find ways to make walkers the more relevant part of the fight and necessary to play. Further, when it comes to the things like the ability to grapple away anytime you get into a fight, or the ability to build a ballista on the ground and zero someone's walker without ever having to commit your own, is also a real danger that has always existed ever since Season 1 of LO Classic. So far for now though, they've had a lot more players on the LOC servers than even Season 5 has currently, so they're managing to keep the population up, at least on the small scale with what they're working with. Whether this grows or not over time, who knows? There's still a whole lot more stuff we have to see. For instance, whether players come back at the beginning of each month-long cycle to jump back into the LO Classic server. From what I've seen, a monthly/weekly wipe has been what worked for games like Rust, and they've been known to grow a lot from having the typical player jump in Discord with their friends and say, "Hey guys, are we playing the wipe today?" Bringing those players that may after a month have disassociated with the game back into the fold once more. If you haven't already, check out my series of solo adventures in LOC to see exactly what I've been experiencing firsthand. If you haven't tried the servers yet and you own the game, then I definitely suggest you give it a shot. If you have any questions about any of the changes I mentioned here, let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.